Hey guys, tonight we're taking a slow, drowsy walk along a shoreline where the waves are curling in under a bruised purple sky, and the salt air clings to your skin like an old friend who doesn't know about personal space. In the distance, there's a figure sprawled lazily on the sand, surrounded by tipped over clay jars and grapevines that look suspiciously out of place on a beach. You probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, but because if you drink whatever's in those jars, your taste buds might file a formal complaint. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love for you to drop your location and your local time in the comments. Let's see how far this little storytelling campfire reaches tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge closer, the sand squeaking under your feet with every step, and you realize the man isn't quite a man. His hair falls in curls as dark as plums. His eyes glint with that mix of warmth and mischief that usually means, I'm about to offer you something you shouldn't accept. He lifts a hand lazily, motioning you over as if you've kept him waiting for hours. There's no throne, no divine entourage, just a tangle of vines creeping out from the dunes, curling around amphorae like they're trying to pull them back underground. You can smell it before you see it, the sharp, heady tang of fermented grapes. It's not the refined, oak-aged aroma of modern wine. It's raw, almost too alive, as if the air itself is slightly tipsy. He speaks without introducing himself, because apparently, when you're Dionysus, god of wine, theater, and mild chaos, names are unnecessary. You're late, he says, in the same tone you might tell a cat it's been ignoring its food bowl. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of crushed grapes and sea brine. Behind him, the waves slap against the shore, and for a moment you think you see something golden in the foam, like coins or sunlight, or maybe spilled wine catching the last of the day. It turns out this beach isn't just a random patch of coastline. It's where, according to at least one obscure version of the myth, Dionysus washed ashore after, well, historians still argue whether he'd been exiled from Olympus for being too rowdy, or if he simply wandered off mid-party and forgot to come back. Either way, he ended up here with a handful of vines and a very flexible definition of plan. He plucks a cluster of grapes from one of the vines and rolls it in his palm. The skin is so dark it's almost black, speckled with grains of sand, and yet somehow they look fresher than anything you've ever seen in a supermarket. You notice his fingertips are stained purple, like he's been doing more than just lounging. Do you know, he says, leaning back on one elbow, how much trouble one plant can cause? You don't answer, mostly because he doesn't seem to need you to. His gaze drifts out to the horizon, where the sky is melting into a deeper indigo, and for a second, he almost looks tired. Not bored, but as if he's carrying the weight of every hangover in history. A few facts you do know, though you keep them to yourself, swim into your mind. Dionysus is the only Olympian said to have a mortal mother, Semele, which makes him the eternal outsider in a family of immortals. And unlike the marble-stiff dignity of Zeus or Athena, Dionysus has always been a little slippery. Half god, half trickster, never staying put long enough to be pinned down. He's credited with teaching humanity how to cultivate grapes and turn them into wine. Although, as you're about to find out, that origin story is a lot messier than the marble statues suggest. Somewhere behind you, gulls cry and squabble, the way humans do after a second round of drinks. You glance at the amphora nearest your foot. Its mouth is chipped, and something viscous is leaking from the crack, dark and glistening in the fading light. The god follows your gaze and smirks. That, he says, is history, not the tidy museum kind, the kind with sand in its teeth. You imagine the jar rolling ashore centuries ago, or maybe just this morning. Maybe he's been sitting here the whole time, waiting for someone to come along so he could hand off the story like a bottle in a relay race. Or maybe he forgot about it entirely and just happened to trip over it while looking for seashells. He gestures to the sand beside him, and as you lower yourself down, you feel the warmth radiating from the ground, heat stored from the day, sinking slowly back into the earth. It's oddly comforting, the way the sea breathes in and out beside you, the way the vines rustle in the breeze like a chorus of whispering voices. Dionysus reaches for a clay cup, slightly chipped, definitely unwashed, and dips it into one of the amphorae. The liquid is thick, almost syrupy, and glimmers in the low light. He holds it out to you with a grin that says, "This is either going to be the best thing you've ever tasted, or the kind of memory you never quite lived down." You take it, the clay rough against your fingers, and the smell is immediate. Rich, sharp, and a little wild. You can't tell if it's going to taste like heaven or like regret in liquid form. The god watches you, his expression unreadable except for the faint twitch of amusement at the corner of his mouth. The first sip burns, not in a bad way, but like the sea wind itself decided to become a drink. It's sour and sweet at once, layered with something earthy, almost like it's still part vine. You swallow, and the warmth spreads out from your chest in slow waves. Somewhere far down the beach, lightning flickers in the distance, followed by a low, rolling rumble. Dionysus tilts his head toward it, unbothered. "Good," he says, as if the storm were part of the recipe. And in that moment, with the wind tangling your hair, the salt on your lips, and the taste of the oldest wine in the world still lingering on your tongue, you realize you've just stepped into the kind of story people try to bottle and never quite succeed. The second sip goes down easier, dangerously easier, like your mouth and brain have decided to stop arguing about whether this is a good idea. Dionysus watches you drain the clay cup, one brow arched in that way people do when they're quietly proud they've just led you into trouble. The amphora beside him sweats in the salt air, a bead of liquid trickling down its side as though it too is exhaling. "Not bad for the first time," he says, and there's that tone again. Half compliment, half confession. "The first wine, I mean. This is it, the original, the accident that changed everything." You blink, trying to square the idea that the muddy, unpredictable liquid in your stomach is history's very first attempt at wine. In the stories, you'd imagined it golden and divine, perhaps poured from crystal goblets under heavenly light. Instead, it's here, on a beach, in a jar that looks like it's been to war and back, handed to you by a god who's barefoot and picking seaweed out of his hair. He leans back on his elbows. "The thing about grapes," he says, "is they ferment on their own. Crush them, leave them alone, and they'll turn into something worth drinking, or at least worth trying." He pauses, glancing at you. "Historians still argue whether I invented wine on purpose or just forgot about a bowl of grapes in the sun. The truth? I did a little of both." You picture it. Dionysus on some sunny hillside, eating handfuls of grapes while watching shepherds chase stubborn goats, and then wandering off mid-bite because a patch of wildflowers caught his attention. Weeks later, he stumbles back, finds the forgotten bowl, sniffs it, and thinks, "Why not?" The result is in your cup. The taste lingers in your mouth, sharper now that you're paying attention. There's grit from the clay, the faint tang of the sea air, and that deep, almost smoky note of something alive. It's not like modern wine. There's no polish, no blending, no careful balance. This is a drink that's still figuring itself out. "Of course," Dionysus continues, "the first sip was interesting. Not in the good way. My tongue felt like it was trying to climb out of my mouth. But then something happened. I stopped noticing the flaws. I started noticing the way the world got softer around the edges." You glance toward the horizon, where the storm is inching closer. The air is heavier now, damp with the promise of rain. The god's voice blends with the steady hiss of the tide. "It wasn't just me," he says. "The satyrs liked it. The nymphs liked it. Even Hermes, fastest mouth in Olympus, was quiet for a while after a cup." He smirks. "Zeus didn't approve, naturally. Said I was encouraging weakness in mortals. I told him weakness was already part of the deal. At least now it came with a better aftertaste." You can almost hear Zeus's thunderclap of disapproval. The Olympians, for all their divine excess, had rules about what mortals should and shouldn't have. Fire, music, agriculture, all given reluctantly or stolen outright. Wine, apparently, was in that same category. Too dangerous, too intoxicating, too capable of making humans feel like gods themselves. The waves lap higher on the sand, soaking the edge of your foot. Dionysus doesn't notice, or doesn't care. He picks up a grape cluster and starts plucking them one by one, tossing each into his mouth with an absent-minded rhythm. "That first vineyard," he says, "wasn't really a vineyard. Just a few vines I carried from place to place. Mortals would ask what they were for. I'd tell them they were shade plants or decoration, or sometimes just refuse to answer. And yet, somehow, every place I went, the vines stayed behind. People figured it out without me teaching them. A fact flickers in your mind. Ancient evidence of winemaking goes back thousands of years, to clay jars in Georgia around 6000 BCE and residues on pottery in Iran. Maybe the myths were just the way people explained that sudden, intoxicating discovery. Maybe the god in front of you is the embodiment of that human moment, the leap from eating grapes to transforming them. But here's the thing, he says, leaning closer. I never stuck around to see what they did with it. I'd pour the drink, watch the smiles spread, and then he waves his hand as if brushing sand off a table. Gone. On to the next place. That's why they say I invented the vineyard and forgot about it. Not because I couldn't remember where it was, though honestly that too, but because I never wanted to own it. Wine belonged to everyone after that first sip. The storm's first fat raindrop lands on your wrist and cold against your skin. Dionysus grins, tips the amphora toward the clouds and says, "Here's to forgetting. Sometimes it's the only way to remember what matters." Another sip, and the warmth in your chest deepens. You feel lighter, the edges of the night turning velvet smooth. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the vines, something rustles, soft, rhythmic, almost like laughter carried by the wind. You can't tell if it's nymphs hiding in the greenery or just the storm playing tricks. Either way, you drink again. By the time the rain fully commits, it's warm, summer rain, the kind that doesn't chase you indoors but makes the world smell sharper, greener. The vines drink it in, their leaves trembling in the breeze, and you swear they grow an inch while you watch. Dionysus doesn't flinch at the downpour. If anything, he leans back, lets the drops soak his hair, and hums under his breath like a cat purring. "This," he says, gesturing at the tangle of plants stretching toward the dunes, "was never meant to happen here. Grapes don't usually grow on beaches. They like hillsides, valleys, places with soil that remembers the sun. But sometimes seeds don't care about the rules." You follow his gaze to where the vines meet the sand, their roots half exposed, clutching at a thin layer of soil like stubborn hands. Some of them are twisted around driftwood, some are climbing the remnants of a rotting pier, and one has found its way up the ribs of an ancient shipwreck jutting from the tide. Historians still argue whether the first vines came from me or from a storm, he says. One tale says I carried them in a basket from the east, and they fell here by accident. Another says they floated across the sea on a log, like shipwrecked sailors who found land before drowning. The truth? I'd had a long night and wasn't paying attention. You try to imagine that, an Olympian god wandering down the shoreline with a cluster of grapes, distracted by a seashell or the shape of a cloud, dropping seeds without noticing. The idea feels right somehow. The rain slicks your hair to your forehead, and you wipe it away, squinting toward the dunes. Beyond the first tangle of vines, there's more, a whole patch of green spilling out in uneven rows. It's not organized like a modern vineyard. It's chaotic, each plant deciding where it wants to be. Some are tangled together in thick braids. Some are thin and wiry, clutching at anything they can find. Dionysus pushes himself to his feet and starts walking toward them, bare feet leaving dark prints in the wet sand. You follow, your toes sinking into the soft ground. The air smells like crushed leaves now, sweetened by the faint yeasty tang of fermenting fruit. "You see?" he says over his shoulder. "When the vines grew here, I didn't think much of it. I was busy." He pauses, picking a grape and rolling it between his fingers. Parties, pilgrimages, a minor incident with a theater troupe that may or may not have been cursed. The vines didn't need me. You want to ask how a plant could possibly grow without the attention of the god who created it, but you already know the answer. Nature has a way of ignoring even its own myths when it wants to. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your memory. Wild grapevines can thrive for decades without human care, their roots stretching deep enough to find water even in unlikely places. That's how some ancient strains survived wars, fires, and entire civilizations collapsing. These vines might not be the same as those first ones, but they might be close enough to taste the past. Dionysus plucks a grape and hands it to you. It's warm from the rain, the skin taut, the color deep enough to swallow light. When you bite into it, the juice is almost shockingly sweet, but there's a tart bite right at the end. You can see how this would become wine without much effort, how the sugar would feed the yeast, how time would turn it into something headier. The god smirks. Good, isn't it? And yet I forgot about them. Left them here, walked away. By the time I came back, there were stories about wild fruit that made you dream in colors you'd never seen before, about a place where the air smelled like celebration. You glance around. Even with the storm overhead, there's a strange brightness to the place. The leaves seem to shimmer faintly, like they've been dusted with morning light instead of rain. The waves hiss against the shore in a steady rhythm, almost like the vines and the sea are speaking to each other. That's the thing about inventions, Dionysus says, pushing aside a curtain of leaves. You can make something and never know what it will become without you. Maybe it's better that way. Mortals shaped wine into something I couldn't have imagined. Ritual, romance, rebellion. If I'd stayed, I might have ruined it. You laugh, and he glances back at you. What? You're basically telling me you invented one of the world's oldest luxuries and then ghosted it, you say. He grins. Exactly. Thunder rolls, closer this time, and the vines sway in the wind. Somewhere deeper in the tangle, you catch the faint glimmer of pottery, half-buried amphorae, their mouths stopped with lumps of hardened resin. The storm keeps pressing in, but you can't shake the feeling you're walking inside a secret no one's supposed to find. Dionysus doesn't seem bothered by the weather, or by the fact that the tide is creeping up toward the roots of his accidental vineyard. He just keeps moving, brushing his fingertips along the leaves as if greeting old friends. Come on, he says, his voice warm despite the wind. If you think the grapes are something, wait until you hear about the first banquet. You're wet, sandy, and already a little buzzed from the earlier drink, but you follow anyway. You're still brushing wet sand from your legs when Dionysus leads you up a gentle rise toward a low bluff overlooking the sea. The vines thin out here, giving way to patches of grass and the scattered bones of old feasts. Broken amphorae, rusted bronze goblets, bits of charred wood that might once have been a table. This, he says with a sweep of his arm, is where wine first got itself into trouble. The bluff is flat-topped and open to the wind, a perfect place for a view, and apparently for the kind of gathering that gets talked about for centuries. Dionysus crouches, pulls a fragment of pottery from the ground, and tosses it to you. The shard is stained dark, as if it's soaked in something deep and stubborn. The banquet, he explains, wasn't my idea. Well, it wasn't entirely my idea. I had friends visiting from Olympus. Apollo, Hermes, a couple of muses, and, he pauses, smirking, one satyr who'd sworn off drinking. You can guess how that ended. You picture it. Gods and demigods reclining on cushions, the air thick with music and roasted meat, the first crude wine sloshing in clay cups, the sea behind them, the vines at their feet, the kind of night that blurs at the edges until you're not sure where the music ends and the laughter begins. The god settles onto a half-buried amphora and leans forward. The thing about wine is it doesn't care who you are. Gods, mortals, satyrs. It'll loosen your tongue, soften your grudges, make you dance even if you've got the rhythm of a broken cartwheel. A fact drifts through your mind. The ancient Greeks often mixed wine with water, not just to stretch it, but to keep its effects gentle. The stronger the wine, the more it was considered a dangerous indulgence, which makes you wonder just how strong this first batch was. It started well enough, Dionysus continues. Toasts to friendship, songs about victory, Hermes telling the story about the time he stole Apollo's cattle, again. He chuckles at the memory. Then someone, probably Ares, suggested a contest to see who could drink the most without falling over. You glance around at the pottery shards and try to imagine the moment the evening tipped from joyful to chaotic. Maybe it was subtle at first, a little louder laughter, a little wilder music. Maybe the stars overhead blurred into streaks. The sea began to sway, even though you weren't standing on a ship. Historians still argue whether that banquet was the moment wine became a symbol for celebration or for trouble, Dionysus says, plucking a blade of grass and twirling it between his fingers. Personally, I think it was both. Celebration is trouble if you do it right. The wind catches your hair, carrying the ghost of something roasted, lamb maybe, or goat, overlaid with that rich, raw scent of fermenting grapes. You can almost hear music, faint but insistent, like the party never fully ended, just sank beneath the soil and waited for someone to pass by. Dionysus stands, takes a few steps toward the cliff's edge, and gestures for you to follow. From here, the view is dizzying. The sea stretches to the horizon, silvered under the shifting clouds, and below, the beach where you started curls away into mist. He tells you about how the muses sang until the air itself shimmered, how Apollo's lyre made the vines lean toward the sound, how Hermes tried to trade an amphora of wine for a better seat in the clouds, and how Zeus eventually arrived, not to join in, but to break it up. That, Dionysus says with a wicked grin, is when I realized wine was more than just a drink. It was a force, a mood, something that could turn even the most rigid god into a fool or a poet. A stray thought pops into your head. If this was the official debut of wine, it was less a polished unveiling and more a chaotic soft launch. But maybe that was the point. No pomp, no ceremony, just a storm of laughter, a few broken amphorae, and a god grinning in the rain. The clouds break for a moment, letting a shaft of moonlight spill over the bluff. It catches on something in the grass, a bent bronze cup, still upright, its surface pitted with age. Dionysus notices you looking at it. Go on, he says. Pick it up. You do, brushing off the dirt. It's heavier than it looks, and when you tilt it toward the light, you see faint etchings on the inside. They're worn almost to nothing, but one shape stands out, a small spiral, curling inward. It's not a symbol, he says before you can ask. It's a reminder. That night wasn't the last time wine got us into trouble. It was just the first time we realized trouble could be worth it. Somewhere below, a wave crashes hard against the cliff. The sound is sharp, then fades, leaving only the soft hiss of water retreating into the sand. Dionysus starts down the path toward the beach again, calling over his shoulder. Come on. If you think gods can throw a party, wait until you hear what happened when mortals got involved. And just like that, you're following again. Half from curiosity, half from the warm, slow current that the wine has left in your veins. By the time your feet hit the wet sand again, the rain has thinned to a fine mist, the kind that clings to your skin without ever feeling like it's falling. Dionysus doesn't slow down. He strides along the curve of the beach, past the spot where you first found him, toward a cluster of flickering lights further inland. You see, he says, Olympian parties are one thing, but when mortals get wind of something new, he lets the thought dangle in the air like a grape on the vine. The lights ahead turn out to be torches, dozens of them, stuck in the ground in a wide circle. Inside, people are milling about, laughing, talking, their faces warm and golden in the firelight. It's not quite a festival and not quite a feast, more like a gathering that doesn't yet know it's going to be remembered for generations. The moment you step into the torchlight, the smell hits you. Roasted meat, fresh bread, and that now familiar tang of wine, sharper here, almost wild. On a makeshift table, clay cups are lined up beside two massive amphorae, each taller than a child. Historians still argue whether I introduced wine to mortals here or somewhere else first, Dionysus says, threading his way through the crowd. Doesn't matter. This is the one they remembered. The people glance your way, curiosity in their eyes, but their attention quickly slides back to the god. You notice the way they cluster around him, not in the stiff reverence you've seen in temples, but in an easy orbit, like friends waiting for the punchline of a story. Mortals are clever, he goes on. Show them a thing once, and they'll start making it their own before you can finish explaining. I didn't even have to tell them how to crush the grapes. They just did it. With their feet. You can't help but grin at the image. Half the village stomping barefoot in a giant vat, purple juice splashing up to their knees. A quirky fact pops into your mind. In some ancient cultures, foot treading wasn't just practical, it was part of the ritual. They believed the warmth of human skin and the rhythm of stomping somehow blessed the wine. Dionysus stops by the table, dips a cup into one of the amphorae, and hands it to a man with weathered hands and a broad smile. The man drinks deeply, then wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. It's strong, he says, grinning like it's both a warning and a compliment. Strong's the point, Dionysus replies, and the crowd laughs. You watch the people drink. Some sip cautiously, others throw back their heads and down it in one go. Already the atmosphere is shifting. Conversations get louder, the music from a nearby lyre picks up pace, and even the shyest-looking woman in the group starts swaying her hips in time. Wine is like a mirror, Dionysus says quietly beside you. It shows people what's already there. Joy, sadness, arrogance, it brings it all to the surface. And he's right. You see it unfolding in real time. Two men clasping hands in sudden reconciliation, a group of young women laughing so hard they can't catch their breath, one old man telling a story so exaggerated that even he can't keep a straight face. Then there's the other side. A pair of men arguing heatedly over who owns the better fishing net, a woman staring into her cup as if trying to see the bottom of her life through it. The god notices, but doesn't interfere. This, he says, is why Zeus didn't trust me with mortals. Wine doesn't choose who it blesses, or curses. The crowd doesn't seem to care about the risk. As the night deepens, the torches burn lower, and the music grows wilder. Someone starts a dance in the center, stamping feet in the dust, hands clapping in a syncopated rhythm. Others join in, and soon the entire torch circle is pulsing with movement and laughter. A boy, no more than 10, runs up to Dionysus, holding a bunch of grapes in both hands. These grew near the river, he says proudly. Dionysus takes them, examines the fruit, and nods. Plant more, he says simply. Wherever you can. That's when it hits you. This is how the vineyard spreads. Not by careful planning or guarded secrets, but by one person showing another, by vines planted in backyards and along riverbanks, by grapes becoming part of the landscape before anyone decides they're important. You feel the warmth in your own chest again, the same tide pulse from earlier. The air smells richer now. Wood smoke, crushed fruit, sweat, and that intangible buzz of a moment when the night could go anywhere. Dionysus raises a cup, and the music falters just enough for everyone to hear him. Drink, he says, not because you need to, but because you can. The cheer that follows rolls into the sky like a wave breaking, and for a moment you wonder if the sound will carry all the way to Olympus. By morning, the torch circle is nothing but blackened stubs and a few sleeping bodies curled near the embers of the cooking fire. The air smells of wet ash and overripe grapes, a sweet sour perfume that sticks in your nose. Dionysus is nowhere in sight until you hear his voice, low and amused, calling from somewhere beyond the dunes. You push through the damp grass, the sand cool under your feet, until the vines rise again to greet you. Only now, they're not the orderly rows you imagine in a cultivated vineyard. These are wild, knotty trunks and sprawling runners that twist over themselves like snakes in slow motion. This, Dionysus says, stepping out from behind a wall of leaves, is the first place I ever forgot about. He gestures to the tangle around him. Thick stems disappear into the earth and reappear meters away, their path impossible to follow. Clusters of grapes hang in odd places, some high and glistening in the sun, others tucked low in the shadows, almost hidden. You get the sense that if you turned your back for too long, the vines would quietly rearrange themselves. Historians still argue whether these are the descendants of my first planting or just opportunists that moved in later, he says. I honestly can't remember. You step carefully between the plants, brushing your fingers over the leathery leaves. The air here is different, cooler, quieter, as though the vineyard itself is holding its breath. Somewhere, a bee drones lazily, and you catch the faint sound of water trickling. Mortals came here once, Dionysus continues, tried to tame it, put up posts and ropes, marked rows, but the vines didn't care. Every year they'd slip their boundaries, climb the posts, choke the ropes until the posts themselves fell. It's not hard to picture. Grapevines are stubborn. They'll cling to whatever they can and keep reaching, even if it means tearing down what's in their way. A quirky fact surfaces in your mind. Wild grapevines can live for centuries, their roots burrowing deep enough to tap hidden springs. This place, Dionysus says, crouching to part a curtain of leaves, reminds me of the truth. Wine wasn't meant to be controlled. Not really. Through the gap, you see an amphora lying on its side, half buried in dirt and leaves. Its surface is mottled with moss, its lip chipped. The resin seal on its mouth has cracked, and a thin stream of liquid has seeped out, staining the soil a faint reddish brown. He runs a finger through the damp earth. This one must have been left here 100 years ago. Maybe more. It was probably good once. Maybe the best I ever made, but no one came back for it. You're about to ask why when he stands and starts walking deeper into the green maze. Come, he says. There's more. The further you go, the more the vineyard feels like a forest. Sunlight filters in through shifting leaves, dappling the ground in gold. The path narrows until you're forced to push vines aside with both hands, the tendrils brushing your arms like curious animals. Sometimes, Dionysus says softly, I wonder if forgetting is a kind of gift. If I'd stayed, I'd have pruned these vines, cut them into neat little rows. I'd have kept them safe and small. He glances back at you. Instead, they grew into something bigger than me, something no god could have designed. You emerge into a small clearing, and there it is, a single massive vine trunk, thicker than your thigh, gnarled and twisted like the roots of an ancient tree. From it radiates a dozen runners, each bearing clusters of grapes in different stages of ripeness: green, gold, deep purple. You take one of the dark grapes, rolling it between your fingers. Its skin is almost black, but it catches the light with a faint bloom, that powdery coat that means the fruit is perfectly ripe. When you bite into it, the juice floods your mouth. Sweet, but layered with an earthy depth, like a memory that's been aged just long enough to feel safe. The god smiles faintly. Not bad for something I abandoned. There's a quiet here, different from the bustle of last night's celebration. It's not loneliness. It's the calm of something that has survived without an audience. The sound of the sea is faint now, barely a whisper through the leaves. You get the strange sense that if you stayed here too long, the vines might curl around your ankles, take root in your skin, and keep you forever. Dionysus seems to read your thoughts. Don't linger, he says lightly. This place likes to keep things. And with that, he turns back toward the light. The path out of the wild vineyard winds like a lazy river, doubling back on itself so many times you wonder if Dionysus is actually leading you somewhere or just letting you circle until you give up. The leaves overhead make a green-tinted ceiling, fluttering enough to spill little flashes of sunlight across your face. It's the kind of filtered light that makes you forget how long you've been walking. When you finally break into the open, the change is almost violent. Wide sky, glaring sun, and a slope that drops steeply toward a cluster of stone buildings clinging to the hillside. They look like they've been there forever, patched and rebuilt in 100 different centuries. First wine trade post, Dionysus says, shading his eyes. Well, one of them. Historians still argue whether this was the actual first or just the first one people actually liked enough to come back to. From up here, you can see terraced fields carved into the slope below the village, neat rectangles stitched together by dusty paths. A river curves in the distance, and you imagine barrels floating downstream, bound for towns that had never tasted anything like what came from these hills. Mortals, Dionysus says with a smirk, love to pretend they invented commerce. But wine? Wine taught them the art of bargaining long before coins did. He leads you down a path that smells of thyme and dry earth, past walls draped with drying herbs and strings of garlic. The villagers you pass glance up, give a polite nod, and go back to whatever they're doing. It's as if they've decided that a god walking through their street is just part of the day. In the square, a few wooden stalls sell bunches of grapes, clay cups, and rough amphorae sealed with wax. You notice a detail. Every jug has a tiny scratch somewhere near the base, like a secret mark. Dionysus leans in to explain, voice low. That? Quality code. Each grower has their own mark, hidden low so buyers in the know can spot it without asking. It's a quirky tradition that still shows up today in certain European wine regions, though now it's often stamped in gold foil on fancy labels instead of scratched in the clay. A woman in a faded red tunic hands Dionysus a cup without a word. He takes a sip, grimaces slightly, and hands it to you. Try it, he says. The wine is young, a little rough, but bright, like it's in a hurry to be noticed. You can almost taste the thin soil and the hot summers, the way the grapes must fight for water. This place, Dionysus says, gesturing to the market, was where wine stopped being just a drink and became a currency. Sailors would trade for it, merchants would smuggle it. Even soldiers would march a little faster if they knew a cask was waiting. He chuckles. Of course, it also became a reason for wars. I left for a while. When I came back, half the vines were gone, burned because someone owed someone else a debt they couldn't pay. The wind shifts, bringing the smell of baked bread and something faintly vinegary. A man is crushing grapes in a shallow trough, his feet stained deep purple. The juice runs down a little channel into a waiting jug. You watch, oddly mesmerized, as the foam swirls and pops. Dionysus watches too, but his expression is unreadable. There's something honest about that, he says at last. No machines, no tricks, just fruit, time, and someone willing to stain their skin for the sake of flavor. You wander toward the edge of the market, where a crumbling wall frames a view of the valley. The afternoon light makes the river below gleam like a silver ribbon. Dionysus leans on the wall, eyes half closed. Funny thing, he murmurs, I can still remember the first face that lit up after tasting my wine, but I can't remember hers. The pause stretches, filled with the sound of distant voices and the clink of clay cups. Finally, he pushes away from the wall. Come on, there's someone I want you to meet. She remembers more than I do. And with that, he heads down a side street so narrow you have to turn sideways in some spots, the smell of grapes slowly giving way to the scent of something older, parchment, beeswax, and a hint of dust. You follow Dionysus through the narrow lane until it widens just enough to admit a single crooked doorway. The door itself is heavy oak, banded with iron, and looks like it has been opened exactly the same way for the last 1,000 years. Dionysus raps twice, no knocker, just his knuckles, and waits. The smell hits first when the door opens. A layered perfume of ink, tanned leather, beeswax candles, and that faint sharp tang of old grape musk that never really leaves a building in wine country. Inside, the air is dim and thick with shadow, except for one window spilling gold light over a table piled with scrolls. Behind it sits a woman whose age is impossible to guess. Her hair is silver, but her posture is straight, and her eyes, sharp as broken glass, flick immediately to you before returning to Dionysus. You still owe me a cask, she says flatly. Dionysus laughs. Still keeping score, Ariadne? A historical fact sneaks up on you. Ariadne, the one who saved Theseus from the labyrinth, was, according to some myths, rescued by Dionysus himself. Historians still argue whether she became a goddess in her own right or just a mortal with a very unusual retirement plan. Here, she seems very much alive, very much in charge. She waves you in without another word, and you squeeze past shelves stacked with clay tablets and sealed jars. Some are labeled in Greek, others in languages you can't place, looping and curling like vines themselves. I keep the records, she says, without looking up from the parchment she's scratching on. Every vineyard that's ever mattered, every cask worth remembering, even the ones that went missing. Her voice dips at the last two words, and you catch Dionysus glancing at the floor. On one shelf, you notice a cracked amphora with faded paint. The design is strange, grape clusters twined around what looks like a small stylized sun. Ariadne notices you staring. That's from the lost vines of Thasos, she says. Wine so strong they say a single cup could make a grown man weep, or dance, or both. Quirky detail. Some modern wine historians have indeed traced odd amphora designs back to regions that don't exist anymore, vanished under the sea or swallowed by shifting coastlines. Dionysus clears his throat. She remembers things I don't, he admits. Or maybe I just forgot on purpose. Like the year you tried to teach the Scythians how to ferment mare's milk? Ariadne shoots back. That was research, Dionysus protests, but you can tell he's enjoying the sparring. She slides a small clay tablet across the table to you. The marks on it look like nothing you've ever seen. Half pictograph, half grape leaf doodle. First record of wine as ritual, Ariadne says. Before coins, before temples, people offered the first press to the earth, hoping the next harvest would be just as good. Historians still argue whether those offerings were meant for the gods or for Dionysus himself. You run your fingers over the etched symbols, the grooves shallow but firm, like they've held on to their meaning for millennia. Ariadne leans back, eyes narrowing. He tells you the charming parts, she says, nodding toward Dionysus. But there were mistakes. Entire harvests ruined because he was distracted, vines left untended, markets that collapsed when wine was hoarded instead of shared. Dionysus shrugs, and there's a fleeting shadow in his smile. I invented joy, not bookkeeping. The room grows quieter, the kind of hush that feels deliberate. Ariadne studies you for a moment longer, then rolls up her parchment. If you're following him, you'll need more than stories. You'll need to see where it all began. Dionysus tilts his head, intrigued. The old grove? She nods. It's still there, mostly. And then, with the kind of suddenness that makes you wonder if she planned it, Ariadne rises, sweeps a bundle of scrolls into a satchel, and strides for the door. You step outside again, blinking at the sunlight, the smell of dust and grapes chasing you into the open air. Don't lag, Ariadne calls over her shoulder. The grove won't wait. You trail Ariadne down a winding path that quickly abandons the neat grid of the town. The air changes, less the warm bread and wine perfume of the village and more the green hush of something old and half wild. Vines creep along the ground here like slow-moving snakes, leaves flashing in the sunlight with every flicker of the breeze. Ariadne doesn't speak much, and neither does Dionysus. He just keeps glancing ahead, as if gauging how much the place will have changed since the last time he saw it. You realize with a start that the last time for him might have been centuries ago. The path narrows to a tunnel of olive trees, their branches knitting together overhead. When the light returns, it's not the crisp white of noon, but something softer, filtered gold, like the inside of an old bottle. The ground underfoot dips, and suddenly you're standing at the lip of a shallow valley. At the far side, enclosed by a low stone wall, half collapsed under the weight of ivy, lies the grove. It's smaller than you expected. Just a handful of twisted vines, their trunks thicker than your leg, leaves curling like they're carved from bronze. Between them, dry grass shimmers in the light. And yet, the air is so heavy with the smell of grapes, you could swear the harvest is in full swing. This is where it started, Ariadne says. Her voice is softer now. The first cultivated vineyard, before amphora, before trade, Dionysus planted it himself. A historical fact sneaks in. Archaeologists in Georgia, the country, not the US state, have found evidence of winemaking from over 8,000 years ago. Pottery shards stained with tartaric acid, the chemical fingerprint of grapes. Historians still argue whether that patch of land or some forgotten hillside in the Near East was the true birthplace of wine. Dionysus steps forward, brushing his fingers along the gnarled bark of a vine. "I remember the day," he murmurs. "It rained the night before, and the soil smelled like it wanted to grow something it could brag about." You notice something strange. Between the roots, the earth glints faintly, as though tiny flecks of glass are scattered there. Ariadne crouches and digs with one hand, bringing up a small polished bead the color of old honey. "Resin," she explains. "We used to seal the jars with it. Some say it preserved the wine. Others say it changed it, gave it a flavor people still try to imitate and never quite manage." Quirky tidbit. In parts of Greece, retsina, wine flavored with pine resin, is still made. Its taste a deliberate echo of those ancient experiments. You kneel and run your own hand over the roots. They're warm, which makes no sense in the shade. You feel, faintly, the thrum of something alive, not just plant alive, but old alive, like the vines remember every hand that ever tended them. Dionysus laughs softly. "Of course they remember. They were here when I forgot." "Forgot?" you prompt. He glances at Ariadne, who doesn't look up from tucking the resin bead into her satchel. "There was a time I left them untended, went wandering. When I came back, the grove had almost gone wild, nearly lost it." There's an unspoken weight in the words. Ariadne finally straightens, brushing dirt from her palms. He means he nearly lost more than vines. You want to ask what she means, but a gust of wind rushes through the grove, rattling the leaves until they sound like whispered arguments. A patch of grass near the wall shifts, and you catch a glimpse of something metallic half buried in the soil. Before you can point it out, Dionysus is already walking toward the far edge of the grove, where a break in the wall leads into another stretch of sunlit path. "Come on," he calls. "There's someone you should meet before the grapes get jealous." Ariadne smirks and falls in step beside you. He means the guardian. If you think vines just grow on their own, you haven't met her. The idea of a vineyard having a guardian makes your mind leap to scarecrows, or maybe an old winemaker with a shotgun and a grudge. But Ariadne's tone suggests something far stranger. As the three of you step through the gap in the wall, you glance back once. The grove looks exactly the same, sun-dappled, still, harmless. And yet you're certain that if you stayed too long, you'd hear those leaves start whispering again. The path beyond the broken wall narrows so much you have to step single file. It winds between low shrubs and half-wild vines that snag your clothes, as though the plants themselves are testing if you belong here. The air is warmer now, heavier with the faint musk of fermenting grapes, even though the fruit isn't in sight. Dionysus walks ahead with a loose, almost lazy gait, but you notice how his eyes keep flicking to the shadows. "Ariadne," Behind you hums some ancient tune under her breath, the melody looping back on itself until you're not sure if it's still music or the sound of the land breathing. After a bend in the trail, you step into a small clearing. In its center stands, well, not what you expected. The Guardian is not a person, exactly. She's taller than anyone you've ever met, easily 7 feet, and draped in a cloak made entirely of dried grape leaves sewn together with twine. Her hair is a tangled mass of vine tendrils, dotted with tiny blossoms that open and close like they're breathing. Her eyes are the color of wet soil, and when she smiles, it's both warm and unsettling, like someone who remembers every bad thing you've ever done but isn't mad about it. Back so soon? She says to Dionysus. Her voice is low, a little raspy, but carries easily through the still air. I owed them a visit, he replies, gesturing toward you. And a story. The Guardian tilts her head at you. Do you know what's growing here? You open your mouth to say grapes, but something about her gaze makes you hesitate. Instead, you shrug. She chuckles. Good. Most people think it's just fruit, but a vineyard is a memory machine. Every season, every hand, every drop of rain, it all gets stored here. Drink the wine, and you drink the year it came from. Historical fact. In the Roman Empire, certain vintages became so famous that amphorae were stamped with the year and vineyard of origin, making them the ancient equivalent of collectible wine labels. She plucks a small cluster of grapes from somewhere in her hair, don't ask how, and tosses it to you. The fruit is deep purple, almost black, with a faint shimmer on the skin. Eat, she says, and see what he forgot. The moment you bite into the first grape, your mouth floods with sweetness, but also with something stranger. A cool rush like stepping into a shaded stream, and the scent of wood smoke curling through an autumn evening. Then come flashes of images. Dionysus younger, planting the vines, his hands stained with earth. Ariadne laughing, weaving garlands from their first harvest. Then nothing. A hole in the memory, like pages torn from a book. You gasp, and the Guardian nods knowingly. That's where he left, she says. Historians still argue whether the abandonment was out of grief, anger, or simple divine distraction. Quirky tidbit. In some medieval monasteries, monks intentionally left certain vineyard rows untended each year, claiming it kept the spirit of the wine humble. Dionysus shifts uncomfortably. It doesn't matter why, he mutters. What matters is it's here now. The Guardian ignores him and turns to you. The grove will tell you the rest if you're willing to listen. The Neslop, but be careful. Once you start hearing, you can't unhear. A breeze stirs the clearing, and the blossoms in her hair release a faint, heady scent. Floral, but with a bitter edge. You feel it settle into your lungs, slowing your heartbeat, making the world around you feel softer at the edges. Dionysus takes your arm gently. We should go, he says. The Guardian steps aside, her leaf cloak rustling like dry applause. Go then, but remember, every sip you take will bring you closer to the missing piece. You glance at Ariadne, who's watching you with that same half-smile she wore in the grove. She doesn't explain. She doesn't need to. As you leave the clearing, you can still feel the taste of the grapes lingering. Sweet, smoky, and threaded with that empty space where a memory should be. The trail widens again, and you realize you're moving downhill now. The slope gentle at first, but growing steeper with every step. The smell of crushed grape skins intensifies, almost dizzying, like someone spilled wine into the air itself. Ahead, the trees thin out and sunlight spills onto a long stretch of terraced vineyards. But these aren't like the ones you've seen in travel magazines or tourist brochures. The rows aren't perfectly straight. They twist and meander, following the curves of the land as though the vines chose their own places. Some trunks are so gnarled they look older than the walls of Troy, their bark thick and dark as charcoal. Dionysus slows his pace. This is the oldest part, he murmurs, the first vines I planted. You almost ask if this is where the missing memory lives, but you catch yourself. The air here feels expectant, like a room where everyone's holding their breath. Ariadne brushes past you, crouching to touch a vine's leaves. Still alive, she says softly, even after all this time. Historical fact. Certain vine varieties, especially in the Mediterranean, can live for over a century, still producing grapes long after the person who planted them is gone. As you walk between the rows, you notice something strange. On certain vines, the grapes are not the familiar deep purple or green, but a pale, almost translucent gold. They catch the light and seem to glow faintly, as though lit from within. Dionysus plucks one and hands it to you. Don't bite it, he warns. Not yet. These are the memory grapes. Eat one before you're ready, and you'll get fragments without the thread to tie them together. It'll drive you mad. Quirky tidbit. In 18th century France, there was a superstition that eating grapes from the first harvest of a new vineyard would let you dream in the vines that night and see next year's weather. You pocket the grape carefully, feeling its faint warmth in your palm. The further you go, the more the vines seem to lean toward you, their leaves brushing your arms and legs as if checking who you are. In the distance, you spot a small stone hut at the edge of the terraces. Its roof is half collapsed, and ivy has crawled over the door like it's trying to seal it shut. That's where I left the press, Dionysus says. His voice is quieter now, almost reluctant, and where I stopped coming back. You hear something in his tone, regret maybe, or a kind of fear he's not used to admitting. Historians still argue whether his sudden disappearance from the vineyard marked a crisis of faith, a political exile, or simply the restless nature of a god who couldn't stay in one place. When you reach the hut, Dionysus pushes the ivy aside and the door creaks open. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of dust and something faintly metallic. In the corner stands the old wooden press, its beams darkened by centuries of use. A long, shallow trough stretches beneath it, stained deep red in places where the color never faded. Ariadne steps inside and trails her fingers along the press. It's still solid, she says. You could use it tomorrow. But Dionysus doesn't move. He stands in the doorway, looking at the shadows like he's trying to see through them. I remember building it, he says slowly, and I remember the first harvest. But after that, he shakes his head. It's just gone. You feel the memory grape in your pocket, its skin still warm, and wonder if this is the place where you should eat it. But something holds you back. Maybe the guardian's warning. Maybe your own sense that the story's not ready to end yet. Instead, you step closer to the press and notice a small carving on the side. It's crude, scratched into the wood with a sharp tool. 3 interlocking spirals. You've seen the symbol before, but you can't remember where. Ready to keep going? Ariadne asks, breaking the silence. You nod, though you're not sure if you are. As you leave the hut, the vines seem to sway slightly, though there's no wind. You can't tell if they're waving goodbye or trying to call you back. You follow the terraces down to a narrow valley where the air is cooler, almost damp. The sunlight thins here, filtering through the canopy in narrow beams that catch tiny particles drifting lazily in the stillness. Somewhere in the distance, water trickles, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat you can hear but not feel. The sound leads you to a small spring bubbling out of a rock face. Moss clings thick around it, soft as velvet under your fingers. Dionysus kneels to drink, cupping his hands like a mortal, and for a moment he doesn't look like a god at all. This spring fed the vines, he says without looking up. Every drop that passed through here went into the wine. It's where it all began. Historical fact, in many ancient vineyards, proximity to a reliable water source wasn't just convenient, it was sacred. Springs were often dedicated to nymphs, and farmers left offerings to ensure the water never ran dry. You crouch beside him, watching the water's surface ripple over tiny silver fish. It smells faintly of minerals, but also something else, sweet like crushed petals. You lean in and catch a glimpse of your own reflection, but it's not quite right. The you in the water's surface looks older, sun-browned, with grape juice staining your fingers. You blink, and the image is gone. Careful, Dionysus says, as if he's seen what you saw. This spring likes to show what you've forgotten you might become. Ariadne dips a finger in the water and tastes it. Still pure, she says, and stronger than I remember. Quirky tidbit. In parts of rural Spain, there's a superstition that if you drink spring water at midnight while holding a grapevine cutting, the vine will root faster when planted. You fill a small clay cup hanging from a nearby branch and drink. The taste is startling, cool and clean at first, then deepening into something richer, almost like honey. The warmth spreads down your chest, and you feel lighter, as if the ground isn't holding you quite so firmly anymore. Dionysus stands and gestures for you to follow a narrow path that runs alongside the spring. There's something I left here, before I stopped coming back, he says. If it's still where I hid it, maybe it'll help. The path winds into a shaded grove, the air thick with the smell of wild thyme and damp soil. In the center of the grove stands a single vine, different from the others you've seen. Its leaves are enormous, its trunk as thick as your leg, and its grapes hang heavy, almost brushing the ground. Dionysus approaches slowly, almost reverently, and begins brushing away leaves near the base. Beneath them, buried under soil and roots, you see the corner of something carved from stone. He pulls, and the earth reluctantly lets it go. A small amphora, no bigger than a loaf of bread, sealed with wax. He holds it up to the light, and you see a dark liquid sloshing inside. "First pressing," he says softly. "The very first harvest from the vineyard. I kept it here so nothing could touch it." Historians still argue whether ancient wines, if stored properly, could survive millennia without turning to vinegar. Some claim that under the right conditions, cool, dark, sealed, the flavors could transform into something unearthly. Ariadne looks at the amphora with wide eyes. "If you drink it, will you remember?" Dionysus doesn't answer. He just tucks it under his arm and starts back toward the terraces. You follow, your steps quieter now, as if the grove itself is listening. Before you leave, you glance back at the great vine. Its grapes sway gently, though there's no breeze, and for a moment you think you hear faint laughter, low, musical, and gone before you can be sure. When you emerge into the light again, the spring's cool trickle is behind you, and the vineyard spreads ahead, each row a path into the forgotten. Somewhere, that memory grape in your pocket feels warmer than before. Afternoon air settles heavy over the vineyard, pressing warm gold light onto the terraces. Cicadas drone lazily in the distance, their steady rhythm syncing with your steps as you follow Dionysus up a gentle slope. The amphora is still tucked under his arm, its wax seal unbroken, though you can see him glancing at it from time to time as if it's whispering something only he can hear. The path narrows, hemmed in by low stone walls overgrown with thyme and oregano. Their scent wafts upward with every step you take, mingling with the faint musk of ripening grapes. Ariadne walks behind you, absently twisting a grapevine tendril between her fingers, her eyes drifting toward the higher ground ahead. You crest the slope and find yourself on a broad, sunlit plateau. Here, the vineyard spreads in every direction, orderly rows of vines stretching to the horizon, leaves shimmering like coins in the light. Dionysus stops in the center and kneels, placing the amphora gently on the earth. Historical fact: ancient Greek vineyard owners often held rituals at the highest point of their land, believing the altitude brought them closer to the gods, and that blessings would flow down like water to the rest of the vines. Dionysus runs his palm over the amphora's surface. "This is where I drank the first cup," he says. "And where I forgot the taste." A breeze stirs the leaves, and with it comes a faint humming, low at first, then swelling like a chorus carried by the wind. You turn, trying to locate the source, but it seems to come from everywhere at once. Ariadne tilts her head, listening. "They remember you," she says. Quirky tidbit. In some rural Greek villages, there's a superstition that vineyards can sing at night before harvest, a faint vibration through the leaves said to be the vines calling for the pickers. Dionysus pulls a slender bronze knife from his belt and scores the wax seal. It gives way with a soft crack, and the scent that escapes is unlike anything you've smelled before. Deep, heady, sweet, and bitter at once, as if the years have been distilled into something more than wine. The aroma alone makes your knees feel slightly weak. "Historians still argue whether wine is ever truly immortal," he murmurs, pouring the liquid into a shallow clay cup. "But this isn't about immortality. It's about memory." He hands you the cup first. The liquid is darker than any wine you've seen, almost black, but when it catches the light, you see glints of crimson and gold, like embers hidden in shadow. You raise it to your lips. The first sip is shockingly alive, velvet on your tongue, layered with flavors you can't name but somehow recognize. The second sip is slower, warmer, and you feel something uncoil in the back of your mind. Images flash, green shoots pushing through soil, sun warming your shoulders, laughter echoing between rows of vines. You aren't just seeing them, you're in them, your hands stained, your feet bare in the dust. When you lower the cup, your breath catches. "I planted them," you say before realizing the words are yours. "I was here." Dionysus takes the cup and drinks deeply. His eyes close, and when they open again, they're different, brighter but heavier, as though the weight of centuries has returned to them all at once. He exhales slowly, then hands the cup to Ariadne, who hesitates before taking her sip. The wind picks up, swirling through the plateau, carrying with it the scent of crushed grapes and old earth. Somewhere below, a dog barks once, sharp and clear, then falls silent. Dionysus sets the amphora down, now lighter, and looks at you both. "We'll need the last of it," he says, "for the gate." "The gate?" you ask. He nods toward the far end of the plateau, where the rows of vines suddenly break into an open stretch of bare soil. Beyond it, you glimpse a structure, low, arched, and covered in ivy so thick it almost disappears into the landscape. The air there looks different somehow, denser, as if the light itself is bending. Without another word, he starts toward it, the cup still in hand. You follow, heart quickening, the aftertaste of the wine lingering on your tongue like a secret you're not sure you want to share. The path to the gate is narrow and shaded, the kind of path that feels older than the vineyard itself, older than the terraces, older than the stone walls. The sunlight struggles through the overgrowth, dappling the ground in fractured gold. You walk in single file, the silence between you broken only by the rustle of leaves brushing your shoulders and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. Dionysus walks ahead, cup in hand, eyes fixed on the shadowy archway in the distance. Ariadne follows close behind, one hand trailing along the vine-choked wall as if to anchor herself. You bring up the rear, noticing how the air grows cooler with every step. Historical fact: in Greek myth, certain places were thought to be thresholds between worlds, liminal spaces where the divine could pass into the mortal realm. Groves, springs, and even certain vineyard edges were considered sacred, marked by stone or ivy to signify their otherness. As you draw closer, the archway reveals more detail. It's not just covered in ivy, it's made of intertwined vine trunks, thick and gnarled, roots twisted into stone. The leaves here are a deeper green than anywhere else, and some carry an almost metallic sheen. A faint hum hangs in the air, so low it feels like it's coming from inside your chest rather than from outside. Dionysus stops at the base of the arch. "This is where I left it," he says softly, "where I walked away." His voice has none of its usual lilting mischief. It's stripped down, bare. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found evidence of ancient spirit gates in rural wine-growing areas, wooden or living vine structures that were ritually watered with wine to invite good harvests or to commune with the gods. Most are long gone, but the myths say that some still breathe. The ivy shifts slightly as if stirred by a wind you can't feel. Beyond the arch, the air isn't quite right, warmer, golden, thick like the inside of a dream. It's impossible to tell if what you see is a field, a city, or a sea. The shapes keep rearranging, never settling long enough for your eyes to name them. Dionysus kneels and pours the last of the amphora into the ground at the gate's threshold. The soil drinks it in with a sound that's almost a sigh. For a moment, nothing happens. Then, the vines along the arch ripple, their leaves trembling in waves from base to crown. The metallic sheen intensifies, flashing gold in the dim light. Historians still argue whether places like this were ever meant for mortals, Dionysus murmurs, or if they were just for us. He stands and steps closer to the threshold. "We go through together," he says, his gaze shifting between you and Ariadne. "If you hesitate, and once it closes, it's gone." Ariadne exhales slowly. "What's on the other side?" He tilts his head, the corner of his mouth twitching with the faintest trace of a smile. "Whatever I forgot." The hum swells until it's all you can hear. Your skin prickles, and your heart beats hard enough to feel in your fingertips. The archway's interior shimmers, then steadies into a glow that makes your vision blur at the edges. You glance at Ariadne. Her jaw is set, her eyes locked on the light. Dionysus takes her hand, then reaches for yours. His grip is warm, grounding, and when he steps forward, you have no choice but to move with him. The moment your foot crosses the threshold, the world folds in on itself. Light and shadow spiraling inward like wine swirling in a glass. You can't tell if you're falling or floating. The hum becomes a deep, resonant chord that you feel in your bones. Then, without warning, everything stills. The light dissolves. You're standing on soft earth beneath a sky you've never seen before. The sky above is the color of ripe figs, deep purple fading to a honeyed gold at the horizon. Clouds drift lazily, each tinged with rose and copper, as though someone swirled them in a glass of late-harvest wine. The air is warm and carries the faint sweetness of crushed grapes, mixed with something wilder, like fresh rain on dry stone. You stand on a rise overlooking what could only be described as the first vineyard. The rows of vines are unlike anything you've seen before. Leaves shaped like little crowns, grapes glowing faintly as though lit from within. The fruit changes color as you look at it: emerald, amethyst, sapphire, never settling on one shade. Dionysus exhales a laugh, the sound softer than you've ever heard from him. I didn't just plant this, he says. I lived here, before the temples, before the festivals. This was mine. Historical fact: in some early myths, Dionysus wasn't immediately recognized as a god of revelry, but rather as a wandering cultivator, spreading vine cuttings across the ancient world, teaching the art of fermentation, and then disappearing before he could be thanked. You and Ariadne follow him down into the rows. The soil is dark and moist beneath your feet, and tiny flowers grow between the vines, releasing a faint perfume when crushed. You pluck a grape, hesitating before you taste it. The moment it bursts in your mouth, warmth spreads through you, like sitting near a hearth after being out in the cold. Quirky tidbit: some old vineyard families in the Mediterranean claim their vines came from lost cuttings gifted by the gods. They keep them in special plots, never pruned, never harvested, only visited for blessings on new plantings. Dionysus stops at a small stone altar overgrown with moss and ivy. An amphora sits on top, cracked but still upright. His hand trembles slightly as he touches it. I left it here the day I walked away, he murmurs. Thought I'd remember without it. I was wrong. He turns, looking directly at you now. We forget more than we think. Sometimes we forget the things we swore we'd keep. His eyes flick toward Ariadne. And sometimes we only remember them when someone walks with us. Historians still argue whether stories like this were allegories, metaphors for the fleeting nature of joy, or hints at real, sacred places that vanished when the last person who knew them died. The three of you stand there for a long moment, the air heavy with quiet. Then Dionysus pours a small measure from the amphora into the earth. The vines shiver, and somewhere far off, you hear the sound of laughter. Not loud or wild, but soft, content, and very old. When you finally turn back toward the archway, the light there has dimmed. You know it's time to leave. And yet, the scent of the grapes clings to you as if determined to be carried back. Wind down. 300 words. The path back feels slower, softer. The sky fades to a muted dusk, the colors settling into calm blues and grays. The hum you heard before is gone, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the breeze, a sound that blends so easily into the rhythm of your own breathing. You glance at Dionysus, who walks ahead in silence now, one hand trailing lightly along the wall of vines. Ariadne walks beside you, her steps unhurried, her eyes somewhere far away. The archway glows faintly, like the last ember in a fire. As you step through, the warmth of the vineyard lingers in your skin for just a moment before the cooler night air takes its place. Behind you, the light winks out, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the scent of earth. Back in the mortal vineyard, the stars have begun to prick through the sky. The moon hangs low, casting a silver path across the rows. You realize you can still taste the grape from that other place, sweet and round, refusing to fade. Dionysus pauses at the end of the row, glancing back with a faint smile. Not his usual mischief, but something quieter. Some things you remember, he says, even when you think you've forgotten. The night air is still, and the sounds of the world seem far away. You feel your shoulders loosen, your steps grow lighter. The journey may be over, but the echo of that hidden vineyard stays with you, like a dream you half remember in the morning, one you wish would linger just a little longer. The sky above is the color of ripe figs, deep purple fading to a honeyed gold at the horizon. Clouds drift lazily, each tinged with rose and copper, as though someone swirled them in a glass of late-harvest wine. The air is warm and carries the faint sweetness of crushed grapes, mixed with something wilder, like fresh rain on dry stone. You stand on a rise overlooking what could only be described as the first vineyard. The rows of vines are unlike anything you've seen before. Leaves shaped like little crowns, grapes glowing faintly as though lit from within. The fruit changes color as you look at it: emerald, amethyst, sapphire, never settling on one shade. Dionysus exhales a laugh, the sound softer than you've ever heard from him. I didn't just plant this, he says. I lived here, before the temples, before the festivals. This was Mine. Historical fact. In some early myths, Dionysus wasn't immediately recognized as a god of revelry, but rather as a wandering cultivator, spreading vine cuttings across the ancient world, teaching the art of fermentation, and then disappearing before he could be thanked. You and Ariadne follow him down into the rose. The soil is dark and moist beneath your feet, and tiny flowers grow between the vines, releasing a faint perfume when crushed. You pluck a grape, hesitating before you taste it. The moment it bursts in your mouth, warmth spreads through you, like sitting near a hearth after being out in the cold. Quirky tidbit. Some old vineyard families in the Mediterranean claim their vines came from lost cuttings gifted by the gods. They keep them in special plots, never pruned, never harvested, only visited for blessings on new plantings. Dionysus stops at a small stone altar overgrown with moss and ivy. An amphora sits on top, cracked but still upright. His hand trembles slightly as he touches it. "I left it here the day I walked away," he murmurs. "Thought I'd remember without it. I was wrong." He turns, looking directly at you now. We forget more than we think. Sometimes we forget the things we swore we'd keep. His eyes flick toward Ariadne, and sometimes we only remember them when someone walks with us. Historians still argue whether stories like this were allegories, metaphors for the fleeting nature of joy, or hints at real, sacred places that vanished when the last person who knew them died. The three of you stand there for a long moment, the air heavy with quiet. Then Dionysus pours a small measure from the amphora into the earth. The vines shiver, and somewhere far off, you hear the sound of laughter. Not loud or wild, but soft, content, and very old. When you finally turn back toward the archway, the light there has dimmed. You know it's time to leave. And yet, the scent of the grapes clings to you, as if determined to be carried back. Wind down. 300 words. The path back feels slower, softer. The sky fades to a muted dusk, the colors settling into calm blues and grays. The hum you heard before is gone, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the breeze, a sound that blends so easily into the rhythm of your own breathing. You glance at Dionysus, who walks ahead in silence now, one hand trailing lightly along the wall of vines. Ariadne walks beside you, her steps unhurried, her eyes somewhere far away. The archway glows faintly, like the last ember in a fire. As you step through, the warmth of the vineyard lingers in your skin for just a moment before the cooler night air takes its place. Behind you, the light winks out, leaving only the rustle of leaves and the scent of earth. Back in the mortal vineyard, the stars have begun to prick through the sky. The moon hangs low, casting a silver path across the rose. You realize you can still taste the grape from that other place, sweet and round, refusing to fade. Dionysus pauses at the end of the row, glancing back with a faint smile. Not his usual mischief, but something quieter. "Some things you remember," he says, "even when you think you've forgotten." The night air is still, and the sounds of the world seem far away. You feel your shoulders loosen, your steps grow lighter. The journey may be over, but the echo of that hidden vineyard stays with you, like a dream you half remember in the morning, one you wish would linger just a little longer. And as you close your eyes, it almost does.